Hello, wonderhussie here, lurking around one of the worst neighborhoods in fabulous Las Vegas. That's right, you've probably been to Vegas before and seen all them big fancy hotels, and you may even have seen some of them fancy housing developments on the golf courses that dot the city of Las Vegas and the city of Henderson, and that's where all the rich folks live. But where do the poor people live? What are the worst parts of Las Vegas? Well, according to Google, this is one of the worst neighborhoods in Sin City. This is the Huntridge neighborhood, so called because it's sort of in the shadow of this giant abandoned movie theater that various developers have been threatening to reopen as some kind of hipster art theater for well over a decade, and will it ever happen? I don't know. Anyway, this neighborhood is sort of at the intersection of East Charleston Boulevard and Maryland Parkway, and it's actually one of the oldest residential areas in Las Vegas. There's a bunch of little tiny houses tucked away back in there, some of which are actually pretty cute, and many of which are in the process of being fixed up and gentrified. That's right, the Huntridge neighborhood is being gentrified by artists and hipsters, but no matter how much they fix up these houses, there's nothing they can do about the fact that this neighborhood was built around a park called Circle Park, because it's kind of like a big circular island in the middle of Maryland Parkway that they can't even keep open. This entire park is surrounded by a chain link fence, and nobody gets to enjoy it because if they didn't have the fence up, it would be overrun by homeless people. We're not that far from downtown Las Vegas and the rescue missions, and unfortunately there's a lot of folks here in Sin City that are really down on their luck. And so if they didn't keep this park fenced off, meaning even the local residents can't use it, it would become a tent city in no time flat. And it's a real shame because you can see it's actually a real nice little park. There's a grassy lawn. There's a very expensive play area that was built not that long ago at great taxpayer expense, I might add. Well, you're probably wondering, how do I know so much about this neighborhood? Well, I used to live here in the Huntridge neighborhood. I actually lived here for 10 years, from 2011 to 2021. And honestly, I never had any problems here. I mean, I think part of that might be due to the fact that I had this really weird roommate who had a big, ugly, rusted out red molester van. You know, one of those big, creepy vans with no windows in the back. And he kept the dang thing parked in the driveway in front of my house. And at first I was like, ugh, Chad, this van is an eyesore. It's leaking oil all over my driveway. You gotta move this thing. But then I realized that red molester van, which he couldn't have moved if he wanted to because it didn't run, was actually the best home security system you could ever ask for, because the entire 10 years that I lived here, I never experienced any violent crime. And in fact, I had a pretty good time down here, probably because any criminals were afraid to mess with me or whoever lived in that house with that giant creepy van. So, hot tip from wonderhussie: don't bother paying for a home security system. Just get yourself a big, creepy van and leave it parked right in front of your house. Although I will say that one time I was walking my dog in the park here back before it was closed. When I first moved here in 2011, this area was kind of in the first thralls of gentrification, and all the neighbors were trying to have yoga in the park and movies in the park and reclaim the park so that us residents could use it. And so there wasn't a fence up. Anybody could go into the park. And so one night I was walking my dog around the park real late at night, and unfortunately he rolled around in some human excrement in the bushes. Oh my God, it was terrible. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was tired. I just wanted to go to bed, but instead I had to take my dog home and give him a bath in the middle of the night to wash the poop out of his fur. And that, my friends, is why the Huntridge neighborhood is considered to be one of the worst in Las Vegas. Okay, having to wash poop off of your dog at 1 o'clock in the morning is certainly annoying, but I gotta be honest. When I was researching worst neighborhoods in Las Vegas and this came up, I thought, come on. Like I said, I lived here for 10 years and I never had any problems. And I've driven around the city a fair bit myself, and I've seen some way worse areas. So since today is a nasty, blustery day and I have some time to kill here in Sin City, I figured I'd drive around and show you some of the really bad parts of town. See what I mean? This neighborhood isn't that bad. I mean, for the most part, it's just working class folks doing what they can to get by. And unfortunately for them, well, the only thing they could afford was a house near a park that no one can use. But when it comes to really bad neighborhoods, well, the first one that probably comes to most people's mind is right here. Okay, this is Fremont Street, which you might think you know Fremont Street. It's the home of the Fremont Street experience, where there's that big LED light canopy up ahead and all those casinos and yard-long daiquiris and people dressed in crazy costumes entertaining for a buck. Well, that's all down there closer to the strip. Over here on East Fremont, it's pretty rough. Okay, there's all these old crack motels that are supposedly being cleaned up and gentrified, but some of them are still just sitting here boarded up, and there's no telling how many homeless people are squatting in them. Look at that. You can see that place had some kind of fire in it. This place is just waiting for some kind of fire in it. Basically, the farther east you go, the worse it gets, and that's, I guess, kind of a rule for Las Vegas in general. Unfortunately, the east side of town is pretty dang janky. And I've actually already covered most of this in a video I made all about Fremont Street, and you can check that out if you're interested. In fact, you might remember some of these janky, semi-abandoned crack motels from that video, which I made something like 5 years ago, and it doesn't honestly look like they've made very much progress fixing this area up. But believe it or not, Fremont Street isn't even the worst area in this part of town. I'm gonna drive down a street up here and show you what I consider to be one of the worst parts of Las Vegas, which is right here off of East Charleston and 26th Street, home of Lois's Sunrise Liquors. I think that used to be a bar. Lord knows what's going on in there today. You might remember this neighborhood from a video I made showcasing the oldest tree in Las Vegas. Somebody at that bar told me that right there was the oldest tree in Las Vegas, and so I did a video talking about the oldest things in Vegas, and I already drove around this part of town a little bit in that video, but I feel like it definitely bears driving through again just so you can see what I'm talking about. I mean, this neighborhood here kind of almost feels like you're in Mexico. And I don't mean anything disparaging against Mexico by that comment. I actually really like Mexico. I'm just saying some of these little streets back here, I mean, none of them have sidewalks. They don't even have street lights. The electrical lines are sagging so low, it looks like these bushes are gonna catch on fire. It just doesn't really feel like you're in a first world country. Am I right? I mean, golly, look at this poor lady walking her kids to the bus stop through this post-apocalyptic hellscape. Okay, maybe post-apocalyptic hellscape is a little bit of an exaggeration. Again, it's just blue-collar folks doing what they can to get by. You know, these are the people who work at the casinos. You only interact with the people at the casinos who live in the fancy suburbs in Summerlin. You know, the cocktail waitresses, the dealers, the bartenders. Well, what about the people that are out there cleaning up your messes or handing you those little porno cards on the strip? You know, those guys that hand out the little escort cards? Where do you think they live? They live in neighborhoods like this. But speaking of post-apocalyptic hellscapes, let's cruise over to an area that I do consider a hellscape. In fact, I would probably go so far as to say, in my opinion, this is probably the worst part of Las Vegas. Okay, we're cruising up Bonanza Road towards downtown. You might be able to see one of the big fancy casinos in the distance, but down here, folks aren't living quite as fancy. In fact, there's a Hells Angels clubhouse somewhere right around here. I used to drive past it all the time when I lived in the Huntridge neighborhood. Oh, there it is. Oh, hopefully I got that on film. Anyway, the Hells Angels clubhouse is hardly anything to be afraid of. There's way worse stuff up ahead the closer we get to downtown. Okay, believe it or not, we are actually just off Las Vegas Boulevard, aka the Strip. But you can see we are a long way from the bright lights of the Las Vegas Strip. Okay, I'm gonna turn up here on Main Street, which, if my memory serves me correctly, is home to some pretty grim realities. I mean, this is reality for a lot of people in Las Vegas. It's not all fun and games and casinos and sexy strippers. There are a lot of people just trying to get by in this surreal and frankly pretty messed up city. Oh, speaking of surreal, check this out. Here's the Paiute Native American Reservation. That's right, you probably didn't realize there's an Indian reservation right in the middle of Las Vegas. There's their tribal smoke shop, there's their tribal police, and there's their giant, massive tribal dispensary. Okay, I guess in a city like Las Vegas, the Indians can't get rich with a casino, but they can make a few bucks selling dope. I mean, some of these parts of town are so bad, you forget that you're in one of the most glamorous cities in the world. This is the same city that brought you the fountains at the Bellagio, the volcano at the Mirage, David Copperfield, Celine Dion. Pretty grim and definitely surreal, especially considering this is all in the shadow of some of these fancy hotels. Okay, now let's go check out one of the historically worst neighborhoods in Las Vegas, the West Side. You can see they tried to cut it off from the rest of town by building a freeway, but unfortunately, the bleeding heart liberals made them open it up so that everybody could get through and gamble away their paychecks in the casinos downtown, including the poor, beleaguered folks who live over here. Okay, this is a historically African American part of town. A lot of people don't realize that Las Vegas is one of the most, or was one of the most racist cities in America. Okay, they actually used to call Las Vegas the Mississippi of the West because it had such strict racist segregation policies. Back in the day, even black entertainers who were headlining on the Strip weren't allowed to stay in strip hotels. Like Harry Belafonte, I think they finally broke down and they let Harry Belafonte stay at the Flamingo because he was performing there, but they wouldn't let him go in the swimming pool. But Harry Belafonte was such a badass back in the day. I mean, if you don't know who Harry Belafonte is, Deo, that guy, he was a stud. He was very handsome and he was very popular with women, white women, and he was popular enough that he was able to just jump right in the swimming pool in the middle of all those white people and not cause too big of a splash, so to speak. And I think partly because of Harry Belafonte and Lena Horne, entertainers like that, they did finally reverse their racist hotel policies. And, you know, before you know it, black entertainers who were performing on the Strip were allowed to stay on the Strip. But that wasn't always the case. And in fact, back in the day, a lot of black performers had to stay over here on the historic West Side in boarding houses. Okay, believe it or not, back in the day there was boarding houses, at least one that I know of, that catered to black entertainers who were coming through town and weren't allowed to stay on the Strip. So they had to come down here and stay among their own kind. And in fact, they even ended up building their own casino down here because they weren't allowed, the entertainers weren't allowed to socialize at the hotels they were playing at. And, you know, after they did their show, they wanted to go out and have a couple drinks and cut a rug, dance, pick up on some chicks. And so they built their own casino over here on the historic west side called the Moulin Rouge. And unfortunately, the Moulin Rouge became even more popular than any of the hotels on the strip. Even Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack used to come hang out at the Moulin Rouge after hours. It was the place to be. So much so that the powers that be running them big casinos weren't about to put up with that. And they ended up shutting down the Moulin Rouge after only something like 6 months. I think it was only open for 6 months, but it was a glorious 6 months. Not so glorious anymore. I think that's actually the projects, or a project. That's a government subsidized housing apartment complex, duplex complex, I'm not sure what you would call it. I used to drive through this part of town pretty regularly, actually. And you might be wondering, what's a nice girl like me doing driving through a part of town like this on the regular? Well, like all do-gooders, I was volunteering. No, not volunteering at the liquor store or the barbershop. I used to volunteer at this Boys and Girls Club. I don't know, you might be able to see. It says Andre Agassi Boys and Girls Club. That's because the tennis player, Andre Agassi, donated a bunch of money to build it. Remember Andre Agassi? I'm ashamed to say I had a poster of him hanging on my wall when I was like 13. I mean, he was dreamy. Anyway, good for him. He donated a bunch of money, built this Boys and Girls Club. I used to come down here once a week to volunteer in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. That's right. I was a big sister to this little girl who was actually bigger than me. She was 12 years old. She was taller than me. She weighed more than I did. And her boobs were like 3 cup sizes bigger than mine. Also, I don't think she was necessarily underprivileged because I remember she went on a cruise with her mom, so I didn't have to come in for a couple weeks. And eventually, I just didn't feel like I was really doing much good. You know, I would go in like to help her with her homework or whatever, but all she would ever do was ask me if I could give her money for the vending machine so she could buy soda and candy and chips. So unfortunately, that volunteering gig didn't last more than maybe I probably did it for about a year. And so in the course of that year, I got an eyeful of the historic west side. Okay, actually, we're not really on the west side anymore. In fact, you can see that because we're driving past our Costco. And when's the last time they let poor people into a Costco? No, we're heading over. Well, we're headed back down to the strip to probably the best known bad neighborhood in Las Vegas. And that is the part of town where it's so hot and toxic that all the buildings are melting. Haha, just kidding. That building was purposely designed like that. It's some kind of Alzheimer's research institute, and it was designed by a big fancy architect to look that way. I guess to somehow mimic neural pathways in the brain or some fancy artsy statement. I guess that's the word for it. Anyway, where we're going, they ain't got time for no artistic statements. We're going to a neighborhood that's sort of nestled in the shadow of the stratosphere. And so if you've heard of any of these neighborhoods as a tourist, well, this is the one you've probably heard of because it is right outside the main tourist area. Okay, this is a part of town called the Naked City. Oh, look, there's the Union Hall. That's where all the cocktail waitresses, bartenders, blackjack dealers come down to get their job assignments, I guess. But golly, you can see it's situated in a pretty rough part of town known informally and I guess even kind of formally as the Naked City. So it's basically a bunch of old, super run-down apartment buildings right here in the literal shadow of the stratosphere. I mean, you could probably hear the screams from the people on the roller coasters up top, maybe intermingled with the screams of despair of those poor souls unfortunate enough to be living here. Just kidding! I actually had, maybe still have, at least one viewer who lives in this part of town, and I went to visit her once at her apartment, and it really wasn't that bad at all. In fact, if I was going to move back to Las Vegas, I might want to live here in the naked city because there's actually a lot of really interesting history here, okay? The reason it's called the Naked City is because this is where all the showgirls used to live. Okay, back in the day when they had the topless reviews on the strip, when you used to be able to go out and have dinner and a show and watch beautiful bare-breasted ladies prancing across the stage clad in nothing but rhinestones and feathers. The glory days of Las Vegas. Well, anyway, those showgirls had to work on their tans, and they couldn't have tan lines when they were going out and doing topless performances. So I guess a lot of showgirls used to live in these little apartments back here, and they used to lay out and tan by the pool topless. Okay, technically that's not naked, but I guess close enough. So anyway, because of that, I thought that was kind of a fun fact. Because all these showgirls used to live back here and tan topless, it became known as the Naked City. The Naked City moniker has nothing to do with the fact that it's frankly pretty grim and depressing. It's a historical name, and that's why if I was gonna move back down here to Vegas, I'd probably live in a neighborhood like this. I mean, I don't think you're allowed to tan topless by the swimming pool anymore, but hey, you never know until you try. Okay, well, I'll be honest with you. I don't think that this quote-unquote naked city is really that bad. I mean, I don't know. As far as bad parts of town go, I feel like Las Vegas is relatively tame compared to someplace like Detroit or Chicago. You know, this probably qualifies as a gated community in a really nasty city. But that being said, there are some neighborhoods in Las Vegas that I do consider truly unthinkable. Places that I would never in a million years wish upon my worst enemy, and where I certainly would never want to live. And for this one, well, we're gonna have to drive a little bit, okay? Most of these bad neighborhoods have been sort of centrally located, clustered around the Strip, downtown, East Side area. But for the neighborhood that I consider the worst, we're gonna have to head out to the burbs. Okay, in my opinion, this right here is one of the worst neighborhoods in all of Las Vegas. And that's because every damn house looks exactly the same. Okay, not exactly the same. I think there's 5 different models you can choose from, but it's basically what you would call a cookie cutter neighborhood. All the houses are the same color. Everyone has the same water smart desert landscaping. Everyone wears the same Lululemon pants and works out at the same gym. In short, it's boring. Okay, I came out here to Henderson, but I don't mean to bag on Henderson in particular. I could just as easily have driven out to a similar cookie cutter development in far north Las Vegas, Summerlin, the Southwest. But I guess I kind of feel like Henderson is particularly charmless. And that's probably because of a personal experience I had on these mean streets. And I'm gonna get back in my car to tell you about it because it's real windy. There's some kind of storm blowing in, and I don't want my hat to blow away. And I also don't want the neighbors to call the cops on me. You know, I'm not from around here. And this is definitely one of them neighborhoods with an HOA and a million Karens. Anyway, the reason I came to Henderson, in particular out of all the cookie cutter communities in Las Vegas, is one time I was in a movie, okay? I used to work as a movie extra every now and then when I lived in Las Vegas, because they film a lot of productions out here. And so back 20 years ago, Chris Rock was filming a movie called Head of State. Okay, this was way back, probably even earlier, maybe like 05, 04. Way before the Obama presidency, Chris Rock starred in and directed this movie called Head of State about a black man who becomes president. And the scene that I was in was at a part in the movie, I guess, when the black candidate was ahead in the polls, and all the racist white people of America were sitting home watching the news, seeing that the black guy was ahead in the polls. Oh no! So the scene called for 1,000 white people. That was the casting call. You had to be white. You know, a mob of terrified white people running down a quiet suburban street to the closest polls to vote against the black candidate. And so for that scene, I think we all had to meet up somewhere down by the strip at some hotel. And then we all got loaded onto a Greyhound bus, or 2 Greyhound buses, 3 Greyhound buses. I mean, it was 1,000 white people. And they bussed us all the way out to the edge of town. Back then, what was the edge of town? Somewhere around here in Henderson, to some super bland cookie cutter neighborhood where all the houses looked exactly the same. And they stashed us down the sides of the houses, you know, between the side yards, out of sight, hiding behind bushes, hiding behind trees. And then Chris Rock, who was also the director as well as the star, he was up on one of those big, like a cherry picker, big boom lift with a megaphone and a camera. And when he was ready to start rolling, he yelled into his megaphone, "All right, white people, run!" And so that was our cue. We all came streaming out from all these little sides and corners and nooks and crannies between all these cookie cutter houses, running in a giant river of white skin, screaming and freaking out down the street. Oh my God! And I don't remember exactly what neighborhood that scene was filmed in, but it was in a neighborhood that looked a lot like this one. And no, before you ask, I could not see myself in the finished film because there was 1,000 white people and I was just one tiny little speck lost somewhere in that Caucasian sea. Anyway, that's why I choose cookie cutter Henderson as my personal worst neighborhood in all of Las Vegas. I would rather live in the naked city on East Fremont in one of those crack motels than live my days out in a place like this. Okay, I'm kidding. I'm sure there's plenty of nice houses out here. And if somebody gave me a house out here, well, I wouldn't turn my nose about it. I'm sure there's plenty of nice things about living out here. Your crime rate is probably pretty low. You're right next to a golf course. There's plenty of California pizza kitchens in the area to dine at. And I'm sure there's plenty of nice folks living on either side of whichever one of these beauties you happen to call home. I'm just weird, and I consider variety to be the spice of life, which is why I lived in the Huntridge neighborhood all those years. Your mileage may vary. Anyway, there you go. I hope you enjoyed this tour of the worst neighborhoods in Las Vegas, and if you do live in Henderson, please understand that I have a sense of humor about all of this, and don't send me any hate mail.